Peace be upon you, Rafiq. We just came from a strange kind of victory. In part 41, we learned that the universe doesn't have to decide to quantize. Quantization is not an add-on rule, not a mystical bolt-on. It is what happens when closure is demanded. When something must return exactly, when a loop must close without tearing, whole numbers appear like fingerprints. Closure forces integers. Winding numbers, holonomies, counts. The continuous gives birth to the discrete not by magic, but by topology. And in part 40, just before that, we stripped away one of our deepest habits. We stopped pretending that meters and seconds are written into reality. We admitted that units are not baked into the silent ground. A meter is a contract, not a cosmic ingredient. A second is a count, not a divine timestamp. Units arrive when a community builds rulers and clocks, when we calibrate against repeating cycles and agree to call the count a name. Before that, the ground is scale-free, unit-free, dimensionless. It has no how many meters in it because it has no meters at all. Now we arrive at part 42, and it is the seal that keeps everything honest. Because even after we remove units and accept closure, there remains a temptation more subtle than all the rest. It's the temptation to hide little knobs inside the ground. The temptation to say, yes, phi is the foundation, but surely it comes with settings. Surely it has an internal dial for how strong gravity will be. Surely there is a hidden slider for the electron mass, a secret switch for the fine structure constant, a concealed button for the speed of light. This temptation is seductive because it feels like explanation. It feels like control. It feels like we have found the master panel behind the universe. Part 42 says no. Undifferentiated phi has 0 internal degrees of freedom. No knobs, no dials, no parameters, no built-in constants. Phi is pure capacity, the bare can of distinction. Nothing more, nothing less. And this is not a poetic preference. It is a firewall. It is a structural necessity if we want a foundation that does not cheat. Let me tell it as a story you can feel in your hands. Imagine a perfectly clear glass on a table. Not a fancy glass with patterns etched into it. Not a glass with a tint. Not a glass that secretly releases flavor. Just a simple, honest vessel. Empty. What does that emptiness contain? It contains no taste, no sweetness, no bitterness, no temperature, no fragrance, no color. It contains one thing only, the ability to hold. Now you pour water into it. The water has a temperature. It might be cold. It has a chemical character. It is H2O. It has a weight. It presses on the table. Does the glass explain the water's temperature? No. Does the glass set the water's chemical composition? No. Does the glass determine whether the water is still or sparkling? No. The glass is not a hidden control panel. It is capacity. If you pour tea, the glass holds tea. If you pour milk, it holds milk. If you pour sand, it holds sand. If you pour nothing, it holds nothing. The specifics belong to what is poured in and how it is poured, not to the empty capacity itself. Phi is that glass. It does not contain electronness, the way a vending machine contains products. It does not contain gravity strength, like a safe contains gold. It does not contain a number waiting to be discovered. It contains one thing: the permission for differences to be possible. That permission is not a list of outcomes. It is a capability. If you want a foundation that is not already a story, you cannot smuggle the story's constants into the foundation. This is the first heart of the seal. If phi has built-in parameters, then phi is not the silent ground. Phi becomes a pre-written script disguised as a foundation. Now imagine a blank canvas. Not a canvas with a hidden sketch underneath. Not a canvas already primed with a certain color that biases every painting. Not a canvas that forces brushstrokes into one style. A truly blank canvas. What does it contain? It contains no blue sky, no green forest, no red sunset, no golden ratio, no sadness, no joy, no artistic constant. It contains one thing, the ability to display marks. An artist paints a landscape, mountains, clouds, rivers. A different artist paints a portrait, eyes, wrinkles, expression. A third artist paints abstract, angles, turbulence, silence. The canvas is not the reason the mountain is tall or the face looks sorrowful. The canvas is capacity. Phi is that blank canvas. And now the key step. If you claim the canvas contains the landscape already, even as a faint imprint, you are no longer describing a blank canvas. You are describing a canvas with hidden structure. And hidden structure in this framework is smuggling. Part 39 already warned us. Before dynamics, before instantiation, only the minimum required for licensing is permitted. Extra structure is narrative freedom pretending to be foundation. Part 42 is that same discipline applied at the deepest level. No internal parameters, zero internal degrees, no hidden switches. Because if you allow hidden switches, you have no way to stop someone from adding more. One knob becomes 10, 10 become 100. And suddenly, phi explains everything simply means phi can be tuned to fit anything. That is not explanation. That is the death of falsifiability. So we install the seal. Phi has no tunable internals. Now we should make this concrete. What are internal degrees of freedom in the simplest language? They are built-in adjustable choices. A radio has internal degrees of freedom. A tuner, a dial, a frequency selector. A guitar has internal degrees of freedom, strings and frets, built-in constraints that shape what sounds are possible. A video game character creator has internal degrees of freedom, sliders for height, weight, hair color. Internal degrees are what can be set from inside the system without adding new parts. If phi had internal degrees, it would mean phi comes with built-in sliders for the universe. But undifferentiated phi, by definition, is before those parts exist. Phi is not yet a guitar. It is not yet a radio. It is not yet a clock. It is the possibility that anything can be distinct from anything else. Nothing more. So part 42 says, there are no sliders in the possibility itself. Now you might say, but surely some numbers are forced. Surely something is inevitable. Yes, some things are forced by structure we have already earned. We earned closure. Closure forces integers. That is a kind of inevitability. But notice what closure does not give you. Closure gives you whole numbers as classes. It gives you winding numbers. It gives you countability of returns. It gives you a type of quantization. What it does not give you is the electron's mass, the strength of the electromagnetic coupling, the specific value of the fine structure constant, the specific ratios of quark masses, the specific mixing angles. Those are not integers from closure. Those are specific empirical features of a particular realized world. Closure gives you a grammar for how discreteness can arise. It does not choose the universe's playlist. This distinction is everything. Topology can force the existence of quantized labels. It cannot, by itself, assign the unique values that our particular cosmos wears. That assignment belongs to instantiation and dynamics, the later chapters where Phi's capacity becomes a particular world with particular stable patterns. And this is exactly what Part 42 protects. It protects the difference between necessary structure, like closure forcing integer invariance, and contingent realization, like this specific coupling constant being approximately this value in our measurements. Without Part 42, people mix these two. They treat contingent numbers like they are sacred necessities. They treat measurements like they are revelations of the ground's secret preferences. Part 42 says, the ground has no preferences. Now let's put the heart of this seal into a single sentence you can carry. If a number is a constant of nature, with units or with a specific measured value, it cannot come from phi alone, because phi alone has no units, no scale, and no parameters to set that value. That is the prediction side. Prediction. No physical constant can be derived from phi alone. Not because we're not clever enough, not because we haven't tried hard enough, but because the foundation is too pure to contain those specifics. If phi is pure capacity, then constants are not in phi. They are in how capacity becomes a particular, stable, realized world. Now we must make this falsifiable, not just inspirational. Falsification challenge. Derive a specific physical constant from phi's definition without importing extra structure. Notice the clause, without importing extra structure, because here is the trap people fall into. They claim to derive a constant from first principles, but their first principles secretly include an entire universe already. They assume geometry. They assume dynamics. They assume boundary conditions. They assume symmetry breaking. They assume a measure. They assume an ensemble. They assume a preferred normalization. They assume a regulator. They assume a renormalization scheme. They assume a model class. Then they produce a number and say, look, derived. But Part 42 demands honesty. What did you import? If you imported anything beyond phi's pure capacity, plus the minimal licensing constraints, you did not derive the constant from phi alone. You derived it from phi plus your added structure. And that may be valuable, but it is not what the seal forbids. The seal forbids the lie that phi alone contains the constant. So the falsification is sharp and fair. Show me a constant obtained from phi with no extra knobs added. Now let's test the temptation with examples. People point to famous constants and say, surely these are fundamental. Surely they are written into reality. Take the speed of light, c. We write it with units, meters per second. But Part 40 already taught us the immediate problem. Meters and seconds are human calibrations. If we choose natural units, we can set c equal to 1. That alone tells you something important. C's numerical value depends on our unit choices. So c is not a hidden number inside phi. It is a conversion factor between our chosen measures of space and our chosen measures of time. Now take Planck's constant, h. Again, we write it with units, joule seconds. But phi has no joules and no seconds. So h cannot be a pre-installed dial in undifferentiated phi. It is a conversion factor that appears when quantum structure is instantiated and we define action through our calibrated standards. Now take Newton's gravitational constant g. It carries units built from meters, kilograms, seconds. Again, not in phi. G is a parameter in the effective dynamics we write down in the regime where gravity is already a meaningful licensed description. Fine. Now someone says, okay, maybe not those. But what about a dimensionless constant like the fine structure constant alpha, about 1 over 137? Dimensionless feels closer to phi, because at least it doesn't carry units. But here is the firewall detail. Even a dimensionless constant is not automatically derivable from pure capacity. Because to even define alpha, you need the whole conceptual apparatus of electromagnetism and quantum field structure, things that are not undifferentiated phi. Alpha is a ratio that belongs to a specific realized theory of interactions. It's a feature of a particular regime, a particular emergent organization. So the seal says, yes, dimensionless ratios are more fundamental than unit-laden numbers. But they are still not derivable from pure phi without adding the structure that defines them. To say alpha is in phi is like saying the blank canvas contains blue. The canvas contains the ability to show blue once paint is applied. The blueness belongs to the painting, not to the blankness. This is the core insight, and now we can say why it matters. Because people are hungry for a universe that is fully inevitable. They want every constant to be derivable from logic. They want reality to be a theorem. They want the cosmos to be the only possible outcome of pure reason. Part 42 is the humility seal against that hunger. It says, maybe the universe is not a single theorem. Maybe it is a capacity that can be realized in many coherent ways. Maybe constants are not chosen by logic, but selected by instantiation. This is not a surrender, it is a discipline. It means we stop pretending we know more than we do. It means we stop turning ignorance into metaphysics. It means we stop treating the ground as a personality with preferences. And most importantly, it protects prediction. Because if you put constants into phi, you can always say, the constant is what it is because phi said it. That sounds like explanation, but it predicts nothing. It blocks investigation. It stops questions. It becomes a lullaby. The pure capacity seal keeps the questions alive and testable. If constants are not from phi alone, then we must look for them in mechanisms of instantiation. Symmetry breaking, boundary selection, dynamical stabilization, topological sector choice, and whatever comes in the later differentiated story. Now let me give you a metaphor that makes the falsification spine visible. Imagine a radio that has no tuner, only a speaker and an amplifier. It has the capacity to make sound, but it cannot select any station. It cannot pick 94.7 FM or 880 AM. It has no internal dial. If someone claims this radio contains 94.7 FM inside it, you can test the claim immediately. You ask, where is the tuner? If there is no tuner, then the station is not in the radio. The station must come from an external broadcast plus a selection mechanism. Phi is that tunerless radio at the undifferentiated level. It contains no 94.7 FM constants. It contains only the ability for distinct signals to exist once differentiation introduces structure. So the falsification becomes, show me the tuner inside phi that produces a specific constant without adding parts. If you cannot, then your derivation is not from phi alone. Now here comes a subtle but crucial clarification, because it's easy to misunderstand. Part 42 does not say nothing is derivable from structure. We already derived something. Integers from closure. We can derive constraints, invariants, impossibility results, equivalence classes, and general forms. What part 42 says is, specific contingent values of empirical constants are not derivable from pure capacity alone. In other words, phi can force grammar. Phi cannot alone dictate the dictionary entries of a particular world. Grammar. Loops have winding numbers. Dictionary entry. This coupling equals 1 over 137. Grammar can be forced by minimal structure. Dictionary entries belong to particular realized histories. Now, why is this firewall so necessary in the holophase architecture? Because our earlier parts already cornered us into it. Part 39, parsimony, says, do not add extra primitives before you've earned them. Part 40, no units, no scales, says, the ground has no built-in measures. Part 41, topological inevitability, says, closure gives discrete invariance, but does not specify the full dynamical content. If you now smuggle in constants at the foundation, you violate parsimony, contradict scale freedom, and confuse topology with parameter assignment. So part 42 is not a new taste. It's the necessary seal that keeps the previous parts coherent. Now let's turn this into the cleanest prediction you can actually use. Prediction. No one will ever derive a specific physical constant from phi alone. And here is how to operationalize that prediction in real life, like a scientific immune system. When you encounter any claim of the form, I derive the electron mass from first principles, or this framework predicts the fine structure constant, do not argue at the level of the number. Instead, ask a single question. What did you assume to make the number meaningful? Then check for the usual smuggled structures. Did they assume a specific geometry? Did they assume a specific dynamical law? Did they assume a boundary condition? Did they assume a symmetry group? Did they assume a vacuum selection rule? Did they assume a renormalization prescription? Did they assume a measurement standard or normalization? If yes, then they derived a number from phi plus that structure, which may be interesting, but it does not falsify part 42. To falsify part 42, they must produce the number with none of those. And if they truly produced it with none of those, you should be able to remove all those assumptions and still have the number remain. That is an extremely strict test, and it must be strict, because otherwise derivation becomes storytelling. This is what it means to be firewalled. Now let's address the most dangerous cousin of this temptation, numerology. There is a particular human weakness we must name gently but clearly. We love to find patterns in numbers. We see 137 and we feel it is meaningful. We see ratios and we feel the universe is speaking in riddles. We want the constants to be beautiful in the way our brains recognize beauty. But part 42 installs a firewall against that. If phi has 0 internal degrees, then there is no reason for constants to be nice. They could be awkward. They could be messy. They could be numbers no one would ever choose. The universe doesn't owe our aesthetic preferences a signature. The only beauty guaranteed at the foundation is the beauty of minimal permission, comparability, closure, invariance, and the discipline of not cheating. Any additional beauty in constants may come from deeper mechanisms of instantiation, but it is not guaranteed by pure capacity. So part 42 says, if you want to claim a constant is inevitable, show me the minimal structure that forces it without tuning. If you cannot, then your pattern may be coincidence, selection bias, or the human brain doing what it does best, weaving meaning. This does not insult the search for deep structure. It purifies it. It says, don't confuse your hunger for inevitability with proof of inevitability. Now, there is an ethical dimension here too, because foundations shape how we speak to the public and how we treat each other in science. When someone says, we are close to deriving all constants from pure logic, it can become hype. It can become a form of authority without verification. Part 42 returns us to integrity. Be honest about what you have and what you assume. If your theory needs 20 extra assumptions to produce a constant, you can still present it, but you must say it plainly. This number depends on these assumptions. That honesty keeps science cumulative. It prevents cults of personality. It keeps the discipline clean. Now, I want to place one final metaphor in your mind because it ties everything together: silence and music. Imagine the silence before a symphony begins. In that silence, there is no note, no chord, no tempo. Yet the silence is not nothing. It is the room's capacity for sound. It is the stage's capacity for performance. It is the orchestra's capacity to begin. When the first note arrives, it has a pitch. When the rhythm begins, it has a tempo. When the harmony forms, it has relationships. But none of those were hidden inside silence as pre-written numbers. They arise when the performance begins. Phi is that silence. It is not a list of constants. It is not a cosmic spreadsheet. It is capacity. And here is the simplest way to say the listener carry. The one sentence you can repeat whenever you feel the temptation to smuggle. Phi is pure can. No hidden switches. If someone asks, where did this constant come from? You answer, not from the silent ground alone, from how the silent ground became a particular world. And that is not a weakness. That is the honest shape of a firewalled foundation. Because the point of Holophase is not to produce a comforting story that explains everything no matter what. The point is to build a foundation that makes genuine prediction possible and genuine falsification possible without cheating. Part 42 is the seal that keeps our hands clean. It prevents us from inserting secret dials into the ground so we can claim we control the universe from the beginning. It forces us to admit the ground permits, instantiation specifies. And now we know exactly where we're going next. If phi has no internal knobs, then the next question becomes unavoidable. How can anything like constants ever appear at all? They must arise from differentiation, from dynamics, from sector selection, from stable patterns of closure and symmetry breaking, whatever the later chapters reveal, always inside licensed windows, always with declared comparators, always with uncertainty discipline. We do not pull constants out of phi like coins out of a pocket. We watch constants emerge like themes in music once the performance begins. One last brief note, because the listener deserves the trailhead. The formal mathematical works behind these ideas can be found on Zenodo by searching for Holophase. And now, keep the carry close. Phi is pure Ken, no hidden switches.